I mean, by default, you can set it up so that it'll proxy everything. I wouldn't recommend that because then you get stuff like, Windows Update getting proxied through your client's network, which is not quiet. All right. Hello, everybody, and welcome to the SiegeCast. I'm Justin Palk, a senior security consultant at Red Siege, and with me today is...
Hi, my name's Ian. I'm a consultant at Red Siege as well.
All right, cool. We're going to be talking today about proxies, and specifically using proxies to bypass the endpoint and attack Active Directory. So, for starters, what does it mean to bypass the endpoint? So, you're not completely bypassing the endpoint. You've still got to have some sort of foothold into your target network. Whether you've somehow managed to breach the perimeter and pivot inside, whether you fished someone and gotten a beacon or something running, there's still going to be something there because you need an access point. But otherwise, bypassing the endpoint means that we're going to do everything we can to run as few tools as possible on the actual host computer. So I guess why would we want to do that? The big thing is if you're running stuff on the host computer, EDR is running there, XDR, whatever sort of security solution, and it doesn't matter how good your beacon or agent or whatever it is. It doesn't matter what obfuscation tool you've got going to hide how things are operating. There's always at least a chance you're going to get detected. And so if we can operate entirely through a proxy or mostly through a proxy, we can just bypass that detection entirely. There's nothing in memory. There's no activity on the host machine other than packets flowing through it. And most endpoint solutions don't do packet inspection. So this immediately clears out a bunch of headaches for us. Let's see. I don't know. Have you done a lot of attacking over a proxy, Ian? Any thoughts?
So typically when I end up, and it's going to largely depend on like the type of test that we're doing. I'll run into instances where like my normal tooling isn't working on the host directly, and then I'll have to proxy stuff through. What I have found usually, and this might lead into some of the cons, is that when you're doing proxy stuff, like, yes, you're not dropping stuff to disk, you're not doing anything that would like raise a detection that way. But there are still behavioral risks that you'll find. For example, let's say that you're running Snaffler through a proxy, which would be a great tool to run. But if the defender, and I've seen this happen a few times, has uh, a detection in place that goes, oh, weird that John from finance is touching every share in our directory, and every directory and every file in that directory under our shares, like that might raise some alarms. But like, you don't want to lose your foothold on the network, so sometimes it's just better to operate through a proxy, especially if you think the defenders are on their game.
Yeah, and that does raise a good point. Network-based detections or widespread event-based detections can still catch you. Now you're back to other things like, trying to just be quiet, move slowly. That's going to help you with those sorts of things. So there is one other con to doing things entirely through a proxy, and that's basically if you're just doing things through the proxy, and there are some ways to get a connection back that literally doesn't involve having a beacon, and we'll get to those in a minute, you don't have access to the endpoint. And what that means is, you can't go searching on disk for credentials. You can't pull Kerberos tickets out of memory, examine registry keys, all that stuff. Anything you would do on that local host to look for information that might be useful for either sensitive information or priv-esque stuff, you're not going to have access to that. Unless you've already got admin credentials for that box, in which case there are a bunch of things you can do, through the proxy. So how do we go about doing this? So you're going to need basically some sort of remote tool on your endpoint, and then you're going to need a local tool back on your, local Kali VM or whatever. Most typically for us, that tool on the endpoint is a Cobalt Strike beacon. It's got a built-in SOX proxy on it, that you can configure to basically, it'll accept traffic coming from your local machine and SOX proxy it into the client's network. And, you can just start touching stuff on the network to your heart's delight. Another option, and we've got a blog post on this, is a malicious shortcut that launches an SSH reverse tunnel. You can use this. This is the option I was talking about that said, you don't even really need your own tool running on the client endpoint. SSH is built into every version of Windows right now. This is the one that unfortunately will not give you access to a bunch of stuff on the host machine. So you've got to make some decisions.
And just to really back that SSH stuff, sometimes that's the only way that I was able to establish C2, where they were blocking every port for egress. The only thing that I could do was like a reverse SSH tunnel over 443. I highly recommend the blog post. It saved me a few times in the past.
Yeah. I haven't had cause to try that one out myself, but it's definitely a cool little technique one of our SkillBridge interns came up with a little while ago. So then what do you need locally? The two ways, you typically do this are you either have proxy chains on Linux or you've got Proxifier that you run on Windows. So proxy chain on Linux, it's basically a tool that will make, proxy unaware tools proxy aware. It'll handle all the proxying part. You run it on a per tool basis. So, let's say you want to run Certify, you run proxy chains on the same command line with some options. You run Certify, and proxy chains will transparently handle everything for you. Then you get over to Proxifier on Windows. Now, Proxifier is a continuously running service or continuously running application. And basically you create a set of, you tell it, okay, this is the proxy I want to use. And then you create a set of rules that will dictate whether a particular application or a particular type of network connection is going to get proxied into, the victim network. By default, you can set it up so it'll proxy everything. I wouldn't recommend that because then you get stuff like, Windows Update getting proxied through your client's network, which is not quiet. I use both of these tools a lot. I don't know. You have any insight on those, Ian?
Yeah, so typically if I'm working off of Linux, I'll use proxy chains. That one you literally edit one line in your proxy chains config to have it become like a SOX proxy, either 4 or 5. Proxifier, on the other hand, I use exclusively when I need to tunnel like Windows tooling that .NET tooling that I need to work on the client system that I don't want to drop to disk, or I might just not even have access to on my victim machine. The big thing with Proxifier specifically is that you need to have a rule that says, okay, all remote name resolution needs to happen inside the network, because typically you're operating from an attacker controlled machine that is not connected. It's not domain joined. The other big thing is that all the proxying that you need to do, all the Windows services and system processes need to be proxied through that other host. You don't want it to proxy locally because that machine isn't domain joined. It's not going to help you. That's the big thing with Proxifier, and it's like I think like $40 for a license. It's totally
30 or
worth it.
$40. It's cheap and it's absolutely worth it. So one thing, both those settings that Ian mentioned, those are just click boxes in Proxifier. The one other thing you often need to do is you need to run a shell as, whatever user you're going to be proxying into the network, so Kerberos will work right. But we recently posted a blog post that explains exactly how to set up Proxifier and use it. So, for the details, go take a look at that. But once you've got those up and running, now we can be making our attacks. And again, on the Linux side, you're largely going to be running Impacket tools or tools that are built on top of Impacket. They're not generally proxy aware, but proxy chains takes care of that. And then it's going to be mostly .NET and PowerShell on Windows through Proxifier. So, I mean, what sort of attacks do you usually make through a proxy, or do you often make through a proxy, Ian?
So I've always made the joke that, typically when I'm doing an engagement, I try to operate like a bear. I'm going to go for the least path of resistance first to get the best results. So a lot of the times when I'm using Proxifier or any of those type of proxy tools, it's mostly because my normal set of tools has failed me. Classically, recently, I could not get Sharp to work on the network. I don't know what was the difference. It wouldn't run. AV was killing it. Everything wasn't working. And we normally only have like maybe a week, sometimes 2 weeks to figure things out, and that's just not enough time to figure out every little facet of somebody's network why a singular tool isn't working. And I was like, okay, well, I'll use AD Explorer. I tried dragging the binary to disk. I tried doing anything else to like just get it to work. It wouldn't work. I was like, okay, well, I'll use Proxifier. I will force it through. You do you run it as a different user, force that through the proxy, and then it collects the AD stuff. You pull it back through, and then there's a script. And forgive me, I don't remember the name of the script right now, but there's a script that can take the AD Explorer.
AD Explorer to Bloodhound or something like that,
Yeah,
maybe?
it's something like that.
Yeah.
We'll post like a pop up with the actual link to it. But essentially, it'll take that and then it'll take that data that was collected by AD Explorer, turn it into something useful like Bloodhound. Or if I really, really want to like live like a pilgrim, I'll work through AD Explorer itself on my Windows non-domain joined computer.
Yeah. And of course, on the flip side, I mean, you could just run Sharphound on your local machine and proxy that
Mhm.
traffic through. Dirkjohn has bloodhound.ad.py, which is a Python-based bloodhound collector. Um, and you'll see for a lot of these attacks, you've got multiple ways of doing this, and there's almost always, a tool on both sides of the OS divide that'll let you do this. Um, I like doing Certify through a proxy. I find it's a little more up to date. Provides a little bit richer data than Certify does, but Certify will absolutely work for you. This is a .NET tool on Windows through Proxifier. Um, file share scanning. Ian already mentioned Snaffler. You can absolutely proxy that. NetExec, SMB map, sharp shares, all those are options for running through a proxy. Now, again, also like Ian mentioned, tons and tons of SMB connections in a short amount of time very likely could attract attention. So you still need to pay attention to your throttling and the rate at which you're doing things. If stealth is one of the criteria um, on your engagement, but again, I've had lots of times where, particularly lately, like running a .NET tool through boff.net, and it'll just, Cobalt Strike will kill it, or Elastic will kill it, or something. There's something in there that they've glommed onto. I see we've both got cats now.
Yeah.
There's just something in there the EDR vendors have glommed onto and said, hey, this is bad. We haven't figured out what the signature is yet, and tried to figure out how to fix that.
So just to piggyback off of what Justin just said, one of the things that I typically will do is when I'm starting an engagement, the first thing I'll look for is see if the Microsoft Store is enabled. If it is enabled, then I'm going to immediately install Python. The reason being is like there's a ton of Python tooling, and then on top of that, PowerShell is watched a lot more frequently nowadays. So sometimes if I can run it through Python, I can get past anything that normally would get lit up if it was ran in PowerShell. Now, if that doesn't work, normally most people would be like, "Oh no, I can't run my tooling." Well, like a lot of Python tooling runs great through a proxy. So, Inpack is probably the best example of that, where a lot of the tooling from Inpacket, you can just run it through the proxy, and then you're perfect. You got all of the tooling that you would ever need to run on the network. And then I find Python scripts would be a little bit easier to like fix issues on the fly than I do like, .NET tooling.
Yeah. I know I'm a lot more familiar with Python than I am with C#,
Yeah.
so a lot quicker to jump in and change something if I need it. So, other things that you can do through a proxy, password spraying, um, user enumeration. So, trying to think what else we've got. So there are some gotchas and things to be aware of when you're running things through a proxy. One of the first things you're going to want to do is grab yourself a Kerberos ticket. It just makes life so much easier when you're trying to authenticate. It also saves you a lot of time, typing out the same username and password again and again and again and again. Um, and also, when running through a proxy, you will often run into issues where it looks like it doesn't want to work. The command looks right. Everything should be firing, but you're not connecting. You've double checked your password, or you've made sure you've got a Kerberos ticket. You're getting connection denied and whatnot. Remember that Kerberos needs host names. And so what I will often find myself doing is I will take a look at the program that I'm trying to execute, and I will look at every single option there is for, really dialing in what it is I'm trying to talk to. And I'll make sure I set all of those. So, I'll make sure I use the host name if for the target that I'm trying to get at. Oh, there's a DCIP option. Okay, I will put in the IP for the DC that I'm going to be working with. Heck, there's a DC name option. I'll throw that in there too. And that it will often fix, that'll probably fix 80 to 90% of the problems that I have. I will also have times where, I was trying to do something with sharp shares on Windows, and for some reason it's just not working. Okay, fine. I'll go over to the Linux side and I'll try the Python, equivalent, SMB map, netexec, something. Because you're not really domain joined, there are some additional wrinkles and complications. So be prepared to spend a little bit of time working through things and figuring out, okay, why is this not working? Why isn't it letting me talk to anything?
The other
Go,
thing sorry, the other thing I
go ahead.
noticed too is, and this is super minor, when you're working through a proxy, things are obviously going to take a little bit longer because you're going through an additional jump as opposed to like executing it in memory on host or on disk for the victim machine. A big thing is with your beacon, you want to make sure it's in an interactive mode because of the amount of traffic going back and forth. You want to make sure, because otherwise you'll run into the issues that like Justin was talking about, where it looks like it's not working. You might get some network congestion, any of those type of issues. So like a big thing that I recommend is, if you can, and it's not going to blow your beachhead, is switch over your beacon to interactive mode. That's typically sleep zeros, the way that I think
Yeah.
you force Cobalt Strike
Cobalt Strike.
into interactive mode.
Yeah. So in terms of detectability, I don't know that I've ever had a beacon blown just by starting a SOX proxy.
Mhm.
I have had cases where, and I was never able to figure out if this was Cobalt Strike or if there was something else. I'm leaning towards Cobalt Strike because I would start doing something through the proxy and the beacon would die, which isn't what I would expect from a really network-based detection. The ability to come back on the machine and say, no, this is the bad process, knock it off. So we are always in that red queen race, running twice as fast just to stay still, trying to keep ahead of um, the defender's tools. All right.
Yeah. So I've only ever found using a proxy and let me say that again. So I have only ever found one time where using a reverse shell or a proxy actually got noticed, and that was specifically because I was trying to again, using that reverse SSH shell. I was trying to establish C2. I was forcing it over 443 because that was the only thing that was available to me, and that triggered an alert. And it wasn't even like the tooling that was pushing through there that triggered the alert. It was the fact that like Sally from HR was trying to do a reverse shell proxy to some weird machine out on the internet that they've never seen before. That's what actually got me caught. Typically, when you do get caught, it will be usually like a Windows security event. The classic, and I would have to look it up. I don't remember off the top of my head. Is when you pull a Kerberos ticket, or you start pulling like every service account's Kerberos ticket, that will generate a Windows security event, and that's what's going to get you popped, not the proxy. And that kind of leads into like the idea of, well, should we build detections around like, oh, there's an organizational unit, our research and developers, they're never going to use a SOX proxy. They're never going to like push their traffic back out of the network where we can't see it or we can't inspect it. That's like a weird behavior to build it, and that might be worth to build a detection around.
Yeah. The one other use case that I forgot that we hadn't mentioned earlier is relay attacks. You can build up a set of proxies so that you can tunnel traffic back from your beacon to your local host, have NTLM relay X running or responder, and then retunnel that back out, with the relayed attack back through your beacon or your connection or whatnot. That's going to be easier to do over a beacon, just because you can, manually go through and modify what port forwards you've got accessible to you once you've got the SSH connection established. Because of the nature of it, you really can't go back in and add a new port forward if you didn't have one there before. And one other thing, you can also play games with SOCAT if you need to if you've got something you're trying to relay, but you need to relay it to localhost on the machine you're operating on, due to a firewall issue or something else. There's a way to bounce it through SOCAT and then through a port forward back on the beacon to get to where you want to be, because most proxy tools do not let you directly relay to localhost like
Mhm.
that. So you'll need to do a little bit of SOCAT magic to make that work. So and that will also be in a blog post that we have posted recently. So all right, Ian, any parting thoughts?
The only other thing that I would super duper recommend, and this is just me being overly paranoid, if you have a choice between like SOX 4 or SOX 5, use SOX 5.
Yeah.
Reason being is if you're pushing hashes, especially client hashes, over the internet, because obviously, most of the time we're not going to be working inside of your network. We're going to be, we're going to have a virtual machine that's going to connect to a C2 that's somewhere on the web, and that C2 is going to catch beacons or callbacks from the victim machine. You want to make sure nobody can get in between that stuff. So use SOX 5. SOX 5 just pretty much enables a user and password for that connection, so that way nobody else can like wiggle their way in there and then actually start capturing the hashes that we're using to patch back and forth over the proxy. Um, a lot of other things would have to go wrong before that was an issue, but at the same time, I used to be in the military for 6 years. I am a firm believer in Murphy's Law. And if you're not aware of what Murphy's Law is if it can go wrong, it will go wrong. So as long as you plan for things to go wrong, you're at least prepared for the fallout. And that's one of the reasons I'm like, use SOX 5, have that little bit of extra protection just in case, you keep a fire extinguisher in your house, just in case there's a fire, not that you're expecting to have a fire.
Yeah. All right, cool. Well, that's it for us today. I hope you all found this informative. Feel free to reach out to us on Discord, and everyone have a good day.